A wealthy billionaire, known for his strict standards and quick temper, had already fired 5 maids over the smallest mistakes. He believed no one could truly meet his expectations, especially when it came to his home and his young daughter, who was battling cancer. Then one ordinary afternoon, he returned home earlier than usual and stepped into the living room. There he froze. His new maid, whom he had barely spoken to, was kneeling on the carpet beside his frail little girl, gently placing a blonde wig on her bald head. It wasn't part of her job, and yet she handled it with such care and kindness that his daughter's face lit up with a genuine smile, a smile he hadn't seen in months. In that moment, the man who thought nothing could surprise him felt his walls break. What he saw wasn't just an act of compassion. It was something that money could never buy, and it changed him forever. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Leonardo arrived home earlier than usual that day. He unlocked the front door and stepped into the living room, expecting to find the usual silence that filled the house. Instead, he stopped in the doorway, surprised by what he saw. Clara, the new maid, was kneeling on the carpet beside his daughter, Anna. Anna, a small girl still weak from cancer treatments, sat patiently as Clara carefully adjusted a blonde wig on her head. Leonardo noticed the precision in Clara's hands and the way she spoke softly to Anna, encouraging her to hold still. The wig settled perfectly, framing Anna's face, and her eyes lit up in a way he had not seen in weeks. Her smile was wide and bright, so pure that it made him forget for a moment about the tubes, medications, and hospital visits. Clara smiled back, clearly pleased to see the girl happy. Leonardo froze, not wanting to interrupt, yet feeling like he had stepped into a moment that did not belong to him. It was not part of Clara's job to do this, but the scene felt so personal that it unsettled him. Leonardo had gone through 5 maids in the past months, each dismissed for reasons he told himself were important, though deep down he knew they were small issues. None of them had connected with Anna in any meaningful way. Most kept their distance, doing their work without looking at her for too long, as if illness was something contagious. But Clara was different. She wasn't just cleaning or tidying, she was sitting on the floor, spending time with his daughter, making her feel special. Leonardo studied the way Clara's face softened when she looked at Anna, as if she genuinely cared. That was rare. He felt a strange mix of appreciation and discomfort. On one hand, he was relieved to see Anna laughing again. On the other, a quiet voice in his mind reminded him that it used to be his wife who made Anna smile like that. He hadn't realized until now how much he had guarded that space, the space of being the one to bring joy to his daughter. Clara adjusted the wig one last time, tucking a few strands behind Anna's ear. "There," she said, her tone cheerful yet calm. Anna touched the hair with her small fingers, as if making sure it was real. "Do I look like a princess?" she asked. Clara nodded without hesitation. "More than a princess," she replied. Anna giggled, the sound echoing faintly in the room, and Leonardo felt his chest tighten. He remembered how his wife used to answer that exact same question, in almost the same words. It was as if Clara had unknowingly stepped into a role that wasn't hers to take. He tried to convince himself that it didn't matter, that it was just a wig, just a small act of kindness. But he knew there was more to it. This was intimacy, the kind that could not be part of a professional contract. It was a moment that belonged to family, yet here it was, unfolding between his daughter and a woman he barely knew. Leonardo leaned against the doorway, watching without saying a word. Clara noticed him but didn't stop what she was doing. She kept her focus on Anna, gently helping her stand up so she could look at herself in the large mirror against the wall. Anna's eyes widened at her own reflection. The blonde hair framed her pale face, giving her a look that was both new and strangely familiar. "I look normal," Anna whispered almost to herself. Clara smiled softly and rested her hands on the girl's shoulders. "You look beautiful," she said firmly, making sure Anna heard every word. Leonardo swallowed hard. He had told Anna she was beautiful many times, but lately his words seemed to slide past her without leaving any trace. Now, hearing it from Clara, Anna's whole posture changed. She stood taller, her chin lifted slightly. It stung to realize that Clara had reached her in a way he hadn't been able to for months. The longer Leonardo watched, the more conflicted he felt. Part of him wanted to step in, join the moment, and make himself part of the happiness he was witnessing. Another part wanted to end it, to reclaim that private space between father and daughter that felt invaded. But he didn't move. Something about the way Anna clung to Clara's side made him hesitate. She hadn't hugged anyone like that since her mother died. Clara wasn't doing anything wrong. She was just being kind, showing compassion, but it still unsettled him. He wondered if letting her get this close would blur the lines between employee and family, a line he had worked hard to keep clear. He had hired her to clean and cook, not to step into a role that carried emotional weight. Yet here she was, doing exactly that without asking, and he wasn't sure if he wanted it to stop. When Anna turned back toward him, her smile was still there, brighter than the last time he had seen it. She ran over and threw her arms around his waist, the wig slightly crooked now from her movement. "Look, Daddy," she said, her voice full of excitement. "I have hair again." Leonardo looked down at her, his hand automatically resting on her back. His eyes flicked toward Clara, who was watching them with a quiet, unreadable expression. He forced a smile for Anna and told her she looked amazing, but inside, the mix of warmth and discomfort was stronger than ever. This wasn't just a small moment, it was a shift. Someone new was in their home, making his daughter happy in ways he couldn't, and that truth left him both grateful and unsettled. He knew things had changed, even if he couldn't yet name how or why, and he stood there, caught between wanting to welcome it and wanting to push it away. Clara stood in her small room early in the morning, folding clothes and placing them into her suitcase. She worked quietly, careful not to make noise. The house felt tense, heavy with the silence Leonardo had kept since the previous day. He hadn't spoken much to her, and when he did, his words were short and distant. She read that as a clear sign. He was going to fire her. She had seen this kind of distance before with other employers. Clara didn't want to stay until he said the words, better to leave before that. She neatly folded a shirt and placed it on top of the others, glancing around the room to make sure she didn't forget anything. Her hands moved automatically, but inside she felt a knot in her stomach. She liked Anna more than she had planned to, and the thought of not seeing the little girl again hurt more than she expected. She zipped one side of the suitcase and sat on the bed, staring at it for a moment before standing up again. Before Clara could close her suitcase completely, she heard hurried footsteps in the hallway, then a soft knock at her door. When she opened it, she found Anna leaning against the wall, her small body trembling slightly. The girl's cheeks were pale, and her eyes seemed glassy. "I don't feel good," Anna whispered. Clara immediately knelt down, touching Anna's forehead. The heat under her palm was alarming. She had a fever. Clara's mind reacted quickly, almost without thought. She had learned how to handle situations like this years ago when she took care of her sister during cancer treatment. "Let's get you to bed," Clara said firmly but gently, supporting Anna with one arm. She called for Leonardo, her voice sharper now. He appeared a moment later, his expression tense, clearly unprepared for what he was seeing. Clara guided Anna back to her room, telling Leonardo to bring a thermometer, a clean towel, and a bowl of cool water. Leonardo followed her instructions without argument, clearly surprised by the authority in her tone. Clara checked Anna's temperature and saw the numbers climb higher than she wanted. She spoke in short, clear sentences, telling Leonardo to place the towel in the cool water, wring it out, and help her lay it gently across Anna's forehead. "We need to keep her comfortable and bring the fever down slowly," she explained, watching his movements to make sure he did it right. When Anna started coughing weakly, Clara propped her up on a few pillows, explaining that it would help her breathe better. She asked Leonardo to open the window slightly for fresh air, but warned him not to let the room get too cold. Every instruction came from experience, her mind recalling moments with her sister, long nights, sudden fevers, and the constant need to stay calm. Leonardo kept looking at her as if seeing her for the first time, unsure how she knew exactly what to do. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, but slowly Anna's breathing steadied. Her fever didn't vanish, but it stopped climbing. Clara sat at the edge of the bed, holding Anna's hand, speaking softly to keep her calm. Leonardo sat on the other side, watching his daughter's face as the tension in her small body eased. He glanced at Clara, noting the steady way she worked, her eyes focused and alert. She wasn't panicked, and she wasn't guessing. She was prepared, as though she had been through this many times before. "How do you know all this?" he finally asked, his voice low so Anna wouldn't hear. Clara didn't look away from Anna when she answered. "My sister," she said simply. "She was sick for a long time. I learned what she needed, and I learned how to keep her safe when things got bad." Leonardo didn't know what to say, but the answer stayed in his mind, heavy with meaning. Leonardo realized he had never asked Clara about her life, never cared to know anything beyond the work she was hired to do. In his mind, she had been just another employee, someone who cleaned the house and stayed out of personal matters. But watching her now, it was obvious she was more than that. She was skilled, quick-thinking, and capable of caring for his daughter in ways he couldn't have managed alone. The cold silence he had kept yesterday seemed foolish now, almost cruel. He had judged her without knowing her, assuming that her value ended where her job description did. That assumption had nearly blinded him to what she could offer, not just as an employee, but as a person. He sat there, guilt slowly mixing with gratitude, realizing that without Clara's presence today, he might have been rushing Anna to the hospital in panic, not knowing what to do. When Anna finally drifted into a light sleep, her breathing even and her small hand still resting in Clara's, Leonardo felt something shift inside him. He stayed seated for a moment longer, looking at his daughter's peaceful face, then at the woman who had just saved them from a crisis. Clara adjusted the blanket over Anna's shoulders, careful not to wake her. When she finally stood, Leonardo met her eyes. There was no trace of the cold distance he had shown her before, only a quiet understanding. "Thank you," he said, and this time the words carried weight. Clara nodded once, not making it a bigger moment than it needed to be, and left the room quietly. Leonardo stayed behind, realizing that everything he thought he knew about her had been wrong. She was more than her job, and he had almost let her walk away before he ever learned who she really was. Clara had planned to leave soon, but after what happened with Anna's fever, Leonardo asked her to stay. She agreed to remain for one more week, just until the girl was fully recovered. There was still a quiet formality between her and Leonardo, but it no longer felt like the cold wall from before. That evening, after Anna's dinner and medication, Clara helped her settle into bed. The girl was restless, tossing under the blanket, clearly too tired to talk, but too awake to sleep. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and began humming softly, then let the melody grow into a gentle song. It was a tune she knew by heart, one she had sung to her sister many times during her illness. Anna's eyes slowly closed as the rhythm of Clara's voice filled the room. Clara's tone stayed low and steady, every note wrapping around the girl in calm reassurance. Within minutes, Anna's breathing became slow and even, her small hands relaxed at her sides. Clara stayed a moment longer, making sure she was completely asleep before standing up. Leonardo was walking down the hallway toward his study when he heard it. The sound was faint but clear enough to stop him mid-step. He turned his head toward Anna's door, where the melody floated through the slightly open gap. It wasn't a song he recognized, but something about it felt strangely warm, like it belonged in the walls of the house. He stood there, listening quietly, feeling an unfamiliar pull in his chest. It had been a long time since the house had held any kind of music. The rooms had been filled mostly with silence, broken only by the sounds of routine chores or Anna's occasional laughter. Now this quiet singing was something different, gentle, patient, and oddly grounding. He didn't want to interrupt, so he stayed where he was, his back against the wall, waiting until the song came to an end. When it did, Clara's voice faded into silence, and he heard the soft creak of the bed as she stood. He quickly stepped away, not wanting her to know he had been there. The next night, Leonardo found himself walking past Anna's room again around the same time. He told himself it was coincidence, that he was simply on his way somewhere else, but he slowed his steps when he heard the song again. Clara's voice was steady, carrying the same melody as the night before. He leaned slightly toward the doorway, not close enough to see inside, but close enough to hear every word. This time he noticed how Anna's breathing matched the rhythm, as though the song had the power to ease her into rest without struggle. He stayed a little longer than he meant to, then left quietly once the room went still. On the third night, he didn't bother pretending. He walked the same hallway at the same time, already knowing what he was hoping to hear. Sure enough, the moment he reached Anna's door, the music was there again, wrapping the air in something that felt almost like safety. Clara never knew he was there those nights. To her, it was just part of caring for Anna, a habit she had carried over from her past. The song had no special name, no grand meaning. It was simply something that had once helped her sister fall asleep when pain or fear kept her awake. Now it seemed to work for Anna too. Clara noticed that the girl would ask fewer questions at bedtime and settle down faster, as if the song made her feel protected. For Leonardo, it was different. He began to notice how the house felt after the singing stopped. The silence that followed didn't feel empty anymore. Instead, it seemed to hold onto a trace of the warmth the song had left behind. Even without talking to Clara, he felt her presence in the way Anna slept more peacefully and in the way the nights didn't feel as heavy as before. It was subtle, but he was aware of it. By the fourth and fifth nights, Leonardo had stopped questioning why he kept coming back to that hallway. It wasn't just about checking on Anna, it was about the effect the song had on the house itself. For months, the home had felt like a shell, functioning but without life. The melody Clara brought each night filled spaces that had been empty since his wife's passing. He never stepped inside the room or asked Clara about it, but he noticed changes in himself. The tension he had carried in his shoulders wasn't as sharp. The urge to fill every silence with work or distraction was fading. And when he looked at Clara during the day, the memory of the song seemed to linger, making the air between them less stiff. They still didn't speak much, but the glances they exchanged no longer carried distance. Instead, there was an unspoken acknowledgement, something quiet but real, like they both understood there was a shift happening without needing to name it. On the final night of that week, Leonardo found himself outside Anna's room once again, his hands in his pockets as he listened. Clara's voice was exactly the same as before, calm and steady, yet now it felt familiar to him, almost expected. He stood there until the last note faded, and when she rose to leave, he stepped away just enough so she wouldn't notice. As she passed him later in the hallway, their eyes met for a brief moment. Neither spoke, but something in that silence had changed completely. It was no longer cold or awkward. It was a shared space they both occupied without discomfort. Leonardo realized then that the music had done more than help Anna sleep. It had started to rebuild something invisible in the house, something that had been missing for a long time. And while they didn't say it out loud, both he and Clara knew that the silence between them now carried not distance, but a quiet sense of connection. Leonardo went to the hallway closet to find an extra blanket for Anna. The air had turned cooler that afternoon, and he wanted to make sure she stayed warm through the night. He opened the top shelf and began moving folded bedding aside. As he pulled out a thick blanket, something slipped from between the layers and fell to the floor. He bent down to pick it up, expecting a misplaced receipt or piece of paper, but it was a photograph. The image was slightly worn at the corners, clearly kept for some time. In the picture, Clara was sitting on a hospital bed beside a young woman with no hair, wearing a wide smile despite her pale face. Clara's arms were wrapped around her, holding her closely. The young woman's head rested lightly on Clara's shoulder, and they were both looking directly at the camera. Leonardo stood there for a moment, staring at the scene. He instantly realized this must be Clara's sister, the one she had mentioned briefly when explaining her experience with illness. The photo spoke of long days, emotional battles, and moments of rare comfort. He slipped the picture back where he had found it, careful to place it exactly between the blankets so it would not look disturbed. Closing the closet door slowly, Leonardo stayed still for a moment, processing what he had just seen. It was one thing to hear someone mention they had cared for a sick relative, but it was another to see a snapshot of that reality. The image made her past more real, giving weight to her calm confidence during Anna's fever. She didn't just know procedures and tricks for comfort, she had lived them, carrying both the pain and the hope that came with it. Leonardo felt an unexpected heaviness in his chest, mixed with a quiet respect he had not fully realized before. He thought about how easily he had judged her when she first arrived, assuming she was only what her job described. Now, that assumption felt even more shallow than it already had. He took the blanket in his hands and walked toward Anna's room, the photograph still vivid in his mind. That evening, after Anna was settled and resting, Leonardo went to the kitchen. He filled the kettle with water and set it on the stove. Clara was clearing away the last of the dinner dishes, moving with her usual quiet efficiency. Leonardo waited until the water boiled, then prepared 2 cups of tea. He carried them to the table and set one in front of her. She looked up, a little surprised, as if unsure the second cup was meant for her. "For you," he said simply, his tone calm. She hesitated before sitting down across from him. He didn't mention the photo, didn't ask her to explain it. Instead, he took a sip from his cup and let the moment settle naturally. They sat like that for a minute, the sound of the clock in the background marking the silence. It wasn't the tense silence they had shared before. It felt more open, almost like an invitation for conversation, without pressure to speak. Clara relaxed slightly, her shoulders losing some of their stiffness. When the tea had cooled enough, Leonardo glanced at her and said her name, not abruptly, but in a tone that carried something softer, almost deliberate. "Clara." She looked at him, meeting his eyes directly, and he held her gaze for a moment before speaking again. "Thank you for staying this week." She gave a small nod, not making it into a dramatic exchange. There was no need for long explanations. The way he had said her name seemed to acknowledge more than the words themselves. For Leonardo, it was an unspoken recognition of the person she was, shaped by her experiences beyond this house. For Clara, it was a sign that he saw her differently now, not only as someone who worked here, but as someone whose presence mattered. Neither mentioned the photograph, but it seemed to hang in the space between them like an invisible thread. They didn't need to discuss it to feel its meaning. As they finished their tea, the air between them felt changed. There was still formality in their movements. Leonardo placed his empty cup in the sink while Clara rinsed hers, but underneath there was something else. It was subtle, yet strong enough that both noticed it. They didn't speak about personal matters, but the silence no longer acted like a wall. It had turned into a quiet space where respect could grow without forcing it. Leonardo thought again about the image of Clara holding her sister in that hospital bed. He imagined the countless nights, the fear and the determination that must have filled those years. It explained her patience with Anna, her ability to act quickly in a crisis, and her calm way of handling even the smallest details. He realized that her value here wasn't just in her duties, it was in the understanding and empathy she brought with her. That was not something he could have listed in a job description, but it was what made the difference in their home now. Later that night, after the kitchen lights were turned off and the house grew quiet, Leonardo passed Clara in the hallway. They exchanged a brief nod, nothing more, but the moment carried a weight that hadn't existed before. It wasn't friendship yet, and it wasn't trust in its fullest form, but it was a step toward both. The photograph remained where he had found it, untouched and unspoken of, but it had changed the way he looked at her. It had shown him a part of her life that explained the steadiness in her presence. As he went to check on Anna, he noticed Clara closing the door to her room. For the first time, the silence that followed wasn't filled with distance, it was filled with an unspoken understanding. Without any direct words about what had happened that day, both of them knew something had shifted. The barrier between them had weakened, replaced by a quiet connection that neither needed to define. It happened late in the evening. Leonardo was in his study going through some documents while Anna was in her bedroom, getting ready to sleep. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The house was instantly filled with darkness. At first, Leonardo sat still, waiting for the power to return, but it didn't. Then, from Anna's room, he heard a sudden cry, sharp, panicked, and rising quickly into sobs. She was afraid of the dark, especially when alone. Leonardo's chest tightened. He stood halfway up from his chair but froze, unsure of what to do. The sound of her crying seemed to grow louder, echoing in his head. He told himself to move, to go to her, but his body felt locked in place. The fear wasn't just about the blackout, it was the fear of not knowing how to make her feel safe. For a few long seconds, he stood there in the shadows, feeling helpless. In the kitchen, Clara had just finished washing a cup when the lights went out. She waited a moment, then quickly reached into a drawer where she kept matches. Lighting one, she found a few candles on the counter, the wax half used from previous outages. She lit them one by one, placing 2 on a plate so she could carry them without spilling wax. From down the hall, she heard Anna's sobs and moved quickly toward the sound, her steps steady even in the dim light. Reaching the bedroom, she found Anna curled up in bed, tears streaking her cheeks. Without hesitation, Clara set the candles on the nightstand and sat beside her. "It's okay, I'm here," she said softly. She wrapped her arms around the girl, holding her close enough for Anna to feel the warmth of her body. The steady grip, not too tight but firm enough to be grounding, began to slow the girl's trembling. Leonardo arrived a moment later, standing in the doorway. The flickering candlelight cast shifting shadows on the walls. Clara was already humming a tune, the same one Leonardo had overheard many nights before. Her voice was low, smooth, and unhurried, each note drawing Anna's attention away from the dark and toward the comfort in her arms. Anna's sobs began to soften, replaced by slow, uneven breaths. Leonardo moved closer, sitting on the other side of the bed. He watched Clara's calm face as she continued singing, one hand gently rubbing Anna's back. The room felt small in the dim light, yet strangely safe. Leonardo realized he had done nothing to help. He had been too frozen by his own fear. The weight of that thought sat heavily in his chest. He stayed quiet, unsure if he should speak, afraid his voice might break the fragile calm Clara had created. After a few minutes, Anna's breathing had settled enough for Clara to stop singing. She kept one arm around the girl, keeping her close while glancing briefly at Leonardo. He looked down at his hands, then spoke in a low voice. "I'm scared I'm not enough for her," he admitted. The words came out uneven, as if he'd been holding them in for a long time. I don't always know what to do. Sometimes I feel like I'm failing her. It was not something he had planned to say, and once the words were out, he wasn't sure what kind of response he expected. He avoided Clara's eyes, ashamed of his own weakness in that moment. Anna, still half asleep against Clara's side, didn't react. The only sound in the room was the faint hiss of the candles burning. Clara didn't rush to speak or offer quick reassurance. She turned slightly, shifting one hand from Anna's shoulder to rest it on Leonardo's. It was not a loose, casual touch. It was firm, steady, and deliberate. Her hand stayed there without movement, not pulling away and not gripping too tightly. The warmth of her skin was enough to make him look up. She still didn't say anything, and yet the silence was filled with meaning. It wasn't the cold, empty silence they had once shared. It was full of presence. The contact told him she was there, that he wasn't carrying everything alone. No rehearsed lines, no false comfort, just the quiet weight of her hand grounding him in that moment. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He didn't thank her, and she didn't expect him to. They stayed like that for a while, the three of them sitting in the glow of the candles. Anna's head rested heavily on Clara's arm, her breathing slow and even now. Leonardo's hand remained under Clara's, not because he needed it to, but because he didn't want it to move. The blackout no longer felt like a threat. The house was still dark, but it didn't matter. The stillness around them felt protective, not empty. Eventually, Clara adjusted the blanket over Anna and leaned back slightly, her hand slipping away from Leonardo's in a way that felt natural, not abrupt. The electricity would return later, restoring the usual brightness to the rooms, but something about this night would remain. Without planning it, they had crossed another invisible line, one that had nothing to do with jobs or roles, and everything to do with trust. And in the quiet that followed, Leonardo understood that sometimes the strongest reassurance came without a single word. It was a quiet afternoon. The sunlight came through the living room window, spreading across the carpet where Anna sat with a small pile of toys around her. Clara was on the floor beside her, holding two wooden spoons. She tapped them gently against a plastic container, producing a soft, hollow rhythm. Anna watched for a moment, her eyes following the movement of the spoons, then reached for one herself. Clara smiled and handed it over, keeping the other for herself. They began tapping together, not in perfect time, but in a way that made sense to them. Soon Clara added a little beat, hitting the container twice before tapping a small toy drum nearby. Anna copied her, missing a few hits but laughing softly each time she did. Clara exaggerated her movements, making funny faces when she missed, turning the mistakes into part of the game. The air in the room was lighter than usual, free from the weight that often lingered around Anna. Leonardo was walking down the hallway toward his office when he heard the muffled sound of tapping and clinking. It was followed by a short burst of sound that made him stop. A laugh. He froze mid-step, unsure if he had imagined it. For months, Anna's laughter had been absent, replaced by quiet sighs, short answers, and occasional forced smiles. He moved slowly toward the living room, careful not to interrupt whatever was happening. From the doorway, he could see them both sitting on the carpet, surrounded by a mix of toys and kitchen utensils. Clara tapped a spoon on a stuffed animal's head, pretending it was part of the drum set, and Anna burst into another laugh, this one louder and freer. It wasn't a polite giggle or a half smile, it was a real laugh, the kind that came from deep inside. Leonardo felt his chest tighten at the sound, his hand resting on the doorframe as he stayed out of sight. Anna kept tapping, switching between the container and the toy drum. Clara encouraged her by adding silly music with other toys. A rattling cup of marbles, the squeak of a rubber duck, even the soft thud of a pillow. Each new sound made Anna laugh again, her small body leaning forward with the effort. Clara laughed too, but it was Anna's voice that filled the room. Leonardo didn't move. He didn't want to break the moment, afraid that if Anna saw him, she might stop. He just stood there watching from the shadows of the hallway. With each laugh, he felt something inside him loosen, as if a heavy knot had been slowly untied. He realized how much he had missed that sound, how much he had feared it might never come back, and here it was, brought out not by medicine, not by special treatments, but by spoons, toys, and the patient attention of a woman who knew how to make his daughter feel safe. Clara clearly understood how precious the moment was. She didn't push Anna to keep going, letting the game slow naturally. When Anna dropped the spoon and leaned back against the couch, still smiling, Clara didn't rush to start something else. She simply sat with her, brushing a strand of hair from her face and letting the calm settle in. Leonardo stayed where he was, his breath steady but deep. He had imagined many times what it would be like to hear Anna laugh again, but he hadn't expected it to happen like this, so casual, so unplanned. And yet maybe that was why it felt so genuine. The laughter wasn't forced. It was born out of comfort. Clara had given Anna something no one else had been able to since the diagnosis, a space where she didn't have to think about being sick. That realization struck him with quiet force. Leonardo's eyes moved from Anna's bright face to Clara's calm expression. She wasn't looking for recognition or praise. She was simply present, focused entirely on Anna. That was when it hit him. What Clara had restored in his daughter wasn't just joy, but security. Emotional safety was something money couldn't buy, no matter how many treatments or comforts he provided. It came from trust, from feeling protected and understood. Clara had built that for Anna without even making it obvious. In that moment, Leonardo's earlier doubts about her role in the house felt distant, almost foolish. He realized that what she was giving his daughter was something he himself hadn't been able to fully provide since his wife's death. Not because he didn't love her enough, but because he had been too consumed by fear and uncertainty to create the same sense of ease. Watching them together now, he knew that losing Clara would mean losing that newfound stability. As he stood there, still unnoticed, Leonardo felt the decision settle quietly inside him. He didn't want her to leave, not next week, not anytime soon. He didn't know exactly how he would say it, but he knew he had to keep her in their lives. The sound of Anna's laughter lingered in his mind like a reminder of what was at stake. He took one last look before stepping back into the hallway, letting the scene continue without interference. Ina was now leaning into Clara's side, still smiling faintly, her earlier laughter replaced by a calm happiness. Clara picked up one of the spoons and tapped it gently against the toy drum, a softer rhythm now, almost like a lull. The moment didn't need words, and Leonardo didn't need to be part of it to feel its meaning. As he walked away, he carried with him the certainty that Clara had given them something irreplaceable, and he wasn't willing to let it go. Clara sat at the small kitchen table, her phone in her hand, reading the email again. It was from an organization she had admired for years, a well-known NGO that worked with children fighting cancer. They were offering her a position to join their team, a role that would involve visiting hospitals, organizing support activities, and guiding families through the challenges of treatment. It was the kind of work she had once dreamed of doing, back before her sister's illness had taken over her life. She remembered the many nights she had spent in hospital corridors, wishing there had been someone to guide her, to tell her what to expect. This job would allow her to be that person for others, but the thought of leaving Anna made her stomach tighten. The girl had come to depend on her, and she had grown attached in ways she hadn't expected. Clara closed her phone and stared at her cup of tea, feeling the weight of a choice she wasn't ready to make. Over the next few days, Clara found herself more distracted than usual. She would start a task and lose track of what she was doing, her mind replaying the possibilities the new job offered. She tried not to let it show, but Leonardo noticed. He didn't say anything at first, watching quietly as she drifted off in thought during moments that would normally have her full attention. When she folded laundry, her hands moved automatically, while her eyes seemed focused somewhere else. At dinner, she sometimes forgot to join in when Anna spoke, responding a moment too late. Leonardo considered asking her directly if something was wrong, but decided against it. He wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. A part of him already guessed she was thinking about leaving, and the idea made him uneasy. Still, he chose silence, convincing himself it wasn't his place to interfere. One afternoon, Anna woke from her nap, complaining of dizziness and nausea. Clara immediately recognized the signs and checked her temperature, finding it slightly high. Within the hour, Anna's energy dropped, her skin pale against the blanket. Leonardo hovered near the doorway, his face tense, unsure how serious it was. Clara moved with calm precision, guiding Anna to sip water slowly, adjusting her pillows and checking her breathing. She explained each step to Leonardo without rushing, her voice steady enough to keep him from panicking. "It's a mild fever," she told him, "but we need to watch her closely tonight." She stayed by Anna's side, preparing a cool cloth for her forehead, helping her shift positions to stay comfortable, and keeping track of the time for her medication. The atmosphere in the room was controlled, not chaotic, because Clara made it that way. Leonardo watched her and realized that without her he wouldn't have known where to start. Hours passed, and Anna's fever stayed under control. Clara barely left her side, except to bring fresh water or replace the cool cloth. When Anna finally drifted into a light sleep, Clara remained seated near the bed, her presence a silent reassurance. Leonardo stepped inside and sat on the other side, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He wanted to tell her she was doing more than just helping. She was holding the house together. The words stayed stuck in his throat. He thought about the NGO job she might be considering, and the fear of losing her settled heavily in his chest. He also thought about how much he relied on her now, not just for Anna's care, but for the sense of safety she brought to their home. The idea of saying out loud that he needed her felt dangerously close to admitting weakness, and he wasn't ready to face what that would mean. As the night went on, Leonardo stayed in the room longer than usual, watching how Clara adjusted Anna's blanket or whispered softly when the girl stirred. She never looked tired or impatient, even after hours without a real break. He thought about how she had walked into their lives as an employee, and how, without warning, she had become someone whose absence he couldn't imagine. He wanted to ask her to stay, to make it clear that she was more than just a helper in the house. But every time he opened his mouth, the words felt too personal, too exposing. What if she stayed only out of pity? What if asking made her feel trapped? He swallowed the impulse, telling himself there would be another time. Yet deep down, he knew there might not be. Clara's attention never wavered from Anna, and that quiet dedication only made the thought of losing her harder to bear. By the time the house settled into silence, Anna was sleeping more peacefully, her breathing steady. Clara stayed in the chair by her bed, her posture relaxed but alert, ready to act if needed. Leonardo stood near the doorway, the dim light casting long shadows on the walls. He thought again about the job offer she might be holding on to, the life she could have if she chose to take it. He also thought about how easily the home could return to the emptiness it had before she arrived. He wanted to step forward, to speak, to tell her he didn't want her to go. Instead, he only said, "You've done a lot for us tonight." Clara gave a small nod without looking away from Anna. The moment passed, but the feeling didn't. As he left the room, Leonardo carried the unspoken truth with him. He might be too afraid to say it, but he didn't want her to leave, now or ever. Leonardo stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door at the end. It had been locked since the day of his wife's funeral, untouched, avoided, as if keeping it shut would stop time from moving forward. That room had once been theirs, filled with the everyday life they had built together, but since her death it had become a silent space, frozen in memory. He had walked past it countless times, feeling the weight of it without ever daring to go in. That night, something in him shifted. He pulled the small key from the back of his desk drawer, the one he had hidden away, and walked slowly toward the door. His hand hesitated on the doorknob, the cold metal pressing against his skin. With a quiet click, the lock gave way, and the door opened. The air inside smelled faintly of perfume, mixed with the dust of months gone by. He stepped in carefully, his eyes moving over the neatly made bed, the dresser, and the framed photos still in place. The room felt like a time capsule. A sweater was draped neatly over the chair by the window, as if waiting for her to return and wear it. Leonardo's gaze moved to the bedside table, where a small wooden box sat. He didn't remember seeing it before. He sat on the edge of the bed and opened it, finding a folded piece of paper inside. The paper was slightly yellowed, but the handwriting was clear, his wife's handwriting. His chest tightened as he unfolded it. The first line confirmed what it was, a letter addressed to him. She had written it during her illness, her words steady despite what she must have been feeling at the time. He read slowly, absorbing each sentence. In it, she acknowledged the possibility she might not survive, and she spoke directly to his future without her. "Don't close the door to the love that will come in unexpected ways," one line read. "Let our daughter laugh, even if I'm not there to hear it." He could almost hear her voice saying them, firm yet gentle, pushing him towards something he had resisted for so long. He read the letter again, and then a third time, letting the meaning sink in. She hadn't been telling him to forget her. She had been telling him to live, to let joy return to their home. He thought of Clara, how she had made Anna laugh again, how she had brought calm during illness, how she had filled spaces in the house that had been empty for too long. He realized that all his hesitation, all his guarded distance, had been in defiance of what his wife had wanted for them. The words in his hands didn't erase the grief, but they broke down the last walls he had kept around himself. The fight to keep everything closed off suddenly felt pointless, even wrong. He folded the letter again, holding it tightly as if it might slip away. The hours passed without him noticing. He stayed in that room, sitting on the floor with his back against the bed, the letter resting in his hands. He looked around at the space, not with the ache of loss this time, but with a quiet acceptance that it was part of the past and part of him. He remembered moments from their life together, both small and significant, but instead of locking them away, he let them move freely in his mind. At some point, exhaustion settled in. He didn't get up to return to his own room. Instead, he leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. The letter stayed in his grip, his fingers curled around it like an anchor. The house was silent, but the silence no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like the kind of stillness that comes before a decision is made. When sleep finally took him, the letter remained pressed against his chest. Morning light crept into the room, touching the floor where Leonardo slept. Clara appeared in the doorway, her steps slowing as she took in the scene. She had never seen this room open before. Her eyes moved from the familiar photographs to Leonardo, still sitting on the floor, leaning against the bed with the folded letter in his hand. She didn't speak at first, not wanting to wake him abruptly. The sight of him there, surrounded by the remnants of a life he had once shared with his wife, told her more than any conversation could have. She noticed the way his hand gripped the paper, not in a loose or careless way, but with purpose, as though whatever it contained mattered deeply. She stayed still for a moment longer, then stepped closer, her movements quiet. She knew this was a private moment, but something about it felt like it was meant to be shared. Leonardo stirred, his eyes opening slowly as he adjusted to the light. He looked up at Clara, his expression calm, but carrying the weight of the night before. There was no hesitation in his voice when he spoke. "Stay," he said simply. It wasn't a plea, and it wasn't an order. It was a choice, spoken with certainty. Clara didn't ask questions, and he didn't explain. The word hung in the air between them, clear enough to carry all the meaning it needed. She gave a small nod, her face steady, accepting without needing to press for details. The moment passed quietly, but it marked a shift that both of them felt. Leonardo had made his decision, and it had come from a place that was no longer afraid. The letter was still in his hand, its message now alive in his actions. Whatever happened next, the door he had kept closed for so long was open. The next morning, Leonardo waited until Anna was settled with her toys in the living room before asking Clara if they could talk. She looked slightly tense, unsure if something was wrong, but followed him into the dining room. The table was clear, and he had already made 2 cups of coffee, setting them side by side. He motioned for her to sit. For a moment, he stayed quiet, as if organizing his thoughts, his hands resting on the edge of the table. Then he looked directly at her. "I want you to stay," he said plainly. Clara blinked, not expecting such a straightforward start. He continued before she could respond. "Not just for now. I want you to stay for good. Not as an employee, but as part of this family. As someone Anna can look to like a mother." The weight of his words filled the space between them. Clara's hands tightened slightly around her coffee cup, her mind racing to process what he was saying. Leonardo leaned back in his chair, his tone steady but warmer than she had ever heard before. He explained that he had been thinking about how much had changed since she arrived, how Anna's laughter had returned, how the house no longer felt like an empty shell. "I can't imagine this place without you," he admitted. "I want to help you with whatever you need. If you want to go back to school, I'll make sure you can. If you need time, support, resources, anything, you'll have it." Clara listened quietly, her eyes fixed on him, feeling the sincerity in every word. There was no sense of pity in his offer, only a deep conviction that this was the right choice for Anna and for himself. She thought of all the moments they had shared, the crises they had faced together, and the slow but undeniable trust that had grown between them. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but thick with emotion. "You're offering me a place in your family," she said, more as a statement than a question. Leonardo nodded, his gaze unwavering. "And the name," he added. "If you want, I'd like you to take our last name. I want Anna to feel in every way that you are hers and she is yours." For a moment, Clara looked down, her fingers lightly touching the rim of her cup. She could feel the sincerity in his words, the genuine desire to solidify what they already had. But she also knew that her place with them wasn't dependent on a name. Slowly, she lifted her eyes back to his, a faint smile forming. "I don't need to be a silver to belong to you," she said softly. "I already belong." The words hung in the air, simple but certain, carrying more meaning than any formal document could. Leonardo felt the impact of her answer immediately. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. Only the quiet strength of someone who understood the depth of the bond they shared. He realized that her refusal of the name wasn't rejection. It was affirmation. She was telling him she didn't need a label to know where she stood. It struck him how rare that was, how most people sought proof in symbols or formalities. But Clara didn't. She'd already given her loyalty and care freely, without being asked. For him, it was as binding as any signature. For Anna, it was the truth she had been living for months, that Clara was home. He nodded slowly, accepting her answer, feeling an unexpected relief wash over him. This wasn't about possession, it was about connection, and they both knew it. They sat in silence for a while, not the heavy kind they had once shared, but one filled with understanding. Leonardo thought about how far they had come from those first awkward days. When Clara was just another employee he assumed would leave sooner or later. Now she was a permanent part of their lives, not because of an agreement written on paper, but because of something stronger. "Anna's going to be happy when she hears you're staying," he finally said. Clara's smile widened, and for the first time that morning, she looked completely at ease. She imagined Anna's reaction and felt a quiet joy at the thought. This was no longer about a job or even just helping a child. It was about a life they were choosing together, bound by trust and care rather than obligation. When they returned to the living room, Anna looked up from her toys and smiled at them both, without knowing what had just been decided. Clara sat beside her, picking up a stuffed animal and joining her game. Leonardo watched them, the weight of the conversation still fresh in his mind, but no longer heavy. Clara's words, "I already belong," played in his head like a truth he had known all along but needed to hear. It sealed something between them, something that didn't need contracts, signatures, or legal ties. It was a bond that had grown in moments of crisis, in shared silences, in laughter, and in trust earned over time. And as Anna leaned against Clara's arm, completely at ease, Leonardo understood that what united them wasn't written anywhere. It lived in the way they chose each other every single day. Years later, Clara stood on the stage of a large auditorium, wearing the traditional black gown and cap. The bright lights above made it hard to see everyone clearly, but she could make out the section where her family sat. In the front row, Leonardo and Anna were side by side, both clapping before the ceremony even officially ended. Anna was now taller, her hair long and healthy, her smile wide. She looked nothing like the pale, fragile child Clara had first met years ago. Clara's heart swelled as she shook the dean's hand and accepted her diploma, proof that she had achieved her goal of becoming a child therapist specializing in oncology patients. It had been a long journey of studying, balancing work and classes, and keeping up with the family's needs. But she had done it. Her eyes locked with theirs again, and she saw the pride in Leonardo's expression and the tears welling in Anna's eyes. When the ceremony ended, Clara walked down the steps and was immediately met by Anna's arms wrapping around her waist. "You did it, Mom," Anna said, the word Mom flowing naturally, as if it had been there her whole life. Leonardo joined them, pulling them both into a hug that lasted longer than usual. "We're so proud of you," he said, his voice steady, but carrying more emotion than he usually showed in public. They left the auditorium together, Anna holding Clara's hand tightly while Leonardo carried the bouquet of flowers they had brought for her. Outside, the evening air was cool, and the sound of other families laughing and talking filled the campus. They headed to a small restaurant nearby to celebrate, sharing a meal filled with stories, teasing, and memories of the years that had brought them to this day. Every now and then, Clara would glance at them, still a little amazed at how far they had all come. Back at home later that night, the house was quiet again after the celebration. The dining table was still scattered with leftover cake, empty glasses, and the bouquet now placed in a vase. Anna kicked off her shoes by the couch and leaned against Clara, a tired but happy look on her face. "Can you sing that song, Mom?" she asked softly. Clara knew exactly which song she meant. It was the same gentle melody she had sung to Anna when fear or illness kept her from sleeping. Clara glanced at Leonardo, who was sitting across from them, watching with a faint smile. She began humming the first notes, her voice just as steady and calm as it had been back then. Anna closed her eyes, leaning her head against Clara's shoulder, letting the familiar tune wrap around her like it always had. Leonardo shifted closer, his voice joining Clara's on the next line. His tone was lower, slightly rough from disuse, but it blended with hers naturally. Together, they carried the song forward, each note steady, almost like they were sealing a promise. Anna's breathing slowed, her small smile still visible, even with her eyes closed. When the last note faded, the room stayed still for a moment, holding the warmth of the music. Leonardo's eyes moved from Anna to Clara, and without breaking the quiet, he said softly, "We're a family. We don't need blood, only courage." Clara's lips curved into a smile, her eyes glistening. She didn't need to respond with words. The truth of it was already understood between them. The moment felt simple, but it carried the weight of everything they had endured. Years of hospital visits, uncertainty, and slow rebuilding had led to this, a night where laughter and safety filled the same walls that had once held so much pain. Clara thought about the promise she had made to herself after her sister's death, to give children facing illness not just care, but hope. Tonight, she realized that the same hope had been given back to her by Leonardo and Anna. She looked around the room, at the worn furniture and the little imperfections of a lived-in home, and felt nothing but gratitude. Leonardo reached over, taking her hand in his without looking away from Anna. She squeezed back gently, feeling the same quiet certainty they had shared in other unspoken moments through the years. The house, once marked by grief, now felt alive in a way she hadn't believed possible in the early days. Laughter didn't feel like a visitor anymore. It was part of the structure, woven into the everyday moments they shared. The silence no longer carried tension. It was comfortable, like a blanket they could all rest under. As Anna drifted towards sleep on the couch, still leaning against Clara, Leonardo stood to turn off the main lights, leaving only the warm glow of the lamp beside them. Clara adjusted the blanket over Anna's shoulders, brushing a hand through her hair. The song they had sung still seemed to linger faintly in the room, not in sound, but in feeling. And as Clara met Leonardo's eyes once more, both of them smiling without speaking, she knew this was what always truly meant. Not just being there in the hardest moments, but choosing each other every day, until love had erased every shadow that had once lived here. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.